Okay, so Nick has been talking a lot about trees. So we're going to talk one more time about trees, okay? So I did my best when Nick first came to me with this topic and was like, do you want to give a sermon about trees? And I was like, maybe? I don't know. So I had to have him give me a few more details about like, what do you mean? What does this look like? Let me not give you a definitive yes or no yet. Let me like actually kind of, I don't know. That's like, I don't know. What am I going to say about trees? So the one that he did kind of break down like what each week would look like, and the tree of we. So I'll get into that more, but that one really intrigued me for a particular reason. So the first thing I'll talk about, give you guys a little story about fruit trees and how I have always wanted my very own fruit tree. That's like a dream that I've had to like, do I have a green thumb? I don't think so. But I just always really wanted like a fruit tree, just like having these visions of being able to like walk into my backyard and pick like a bowl of fresh fruit, because it really does taste like better when it's fresh and you pick it from the vine. And been able, like my top three would be like a cherry tree, an apple tree, and a peach tree. Those would be like the main trees that I would really want to have these visions of like wanting a fruit tree. But really like almost any fruit tree would do. As long as it's not like, I don't know, some kind of poisonous fruit. But I'll eat most fruits. And so I just always had these visions of having a fruit tree. And I don't know, maybe one day I still will. But then when we moved, well, there's a couple of things. So I started also kind of thinking through a little bit more about the maintenance of fruit trees. And somebody has told me before that like fruit trees kind of can get diseased pretty easily if you don't take care of them. So now I was like, still want one, but I don't know, that would be a little hard. And then I also started thinking about like, somebody's got to clean up all the fruit that drops on the ground and that rots, and like, you know, you might get an insect or rodent infestation. And then when we were buying our house in Arizona, believe it or not, even though it's the desert, there are a bunch of citrus trees in Arizona, tons of like orange trees and grapefruit trees, lemons, lime, all the citrus trees. There's so many orange trees, and there's actually a lot of houses that have citrus trees in their yard. So when we were buying our house, I had my sights set. I was like, we are getting a house with an orange tree. It is happening. My dreams are going to finally come true. And then somebody told me that orange trees attract scorpions and roof rats. Never mind. I'm done. My dreams are I don't want it that bad. So I didn't want a fruit tree anymore. And then thinking about the maintenance and all that. But, you know, I'm still a little bit intrigued by trees and by fruit trees and all of the things that they need. So one thing that I have learned about fruit trees, and it's on the next slide, that they need a little something called pollination. So in order to cultivate, we must pollinate. And then you see like this tree there, and it says the mystery behind my parents' plum tree. You're thinking plum tree, so you had a tree? Not exactly. So growing up, I grew up in Portland, Oregon. This is not a picture of my parents' plum tree, but my parents have a quote unquote plum tree that looked very much like this. And I'm pretty sure before I was even born that my like mom and dad bought this plum tree. It's literally like, it's still there in the front of the house. They bought a plum tree and then like I don't know, some kind of non-fruit bearing tree, like a maple, something with green leaves. I don't know what it is. And I'm pretty sure pretty much as I would like my whole life, at least what I can remember, that tree was like definitely old enough to grow some plums. My mom kept calling it a plum tree, but honestly, I thought it was just like a fake plum tree, like something that you just called it a plum tree, but I never saw any plums, so I thought it was just like, I don't know, this is called a plum tree, but it's not like a real plum tree. Maybe they just call it like that because it has that color. I didn't know. So it's really interesting. Never produced any fruit. Then I go off to college. I'm a young adult, and one day I'm talking to my mom, and she's like, guess what? The plum tree actually, like there's plums this summer. We have plums. I'm like, what? I thought that was just like a fake plum tree. I don't understand. I thought that was really interesting. But one time, at some point, I was walking around at like either Lowe's or Home Depot in like their plant section, in the nursery section, and they have like all these little sapling fruit trees with the tags on them, peach tree, apple tree, telling you what kinds, and there's these other tags on most of them that also say needs a cross-pollinator. And I was intrigued, needs a cross-pollinator. What does that mean? And so somebody told me, oh, a lot of fruit trees, most fruit trees need another fruit tree of the same variety in order for it to actually bear fruit. They need a cross-pollinator in order for it to actually like grow fruit on the tree. So I thought that was really interesting, and like things get cross-pollinated in a couple of different ways. Like bees can carry pollen from one tree and one plant to another. The wind carries pollen from trees to other trees. And I remember telling my mom, I bet you that's why it took so long for our tree to actually grow any fruit. And so not all trees, so you can go to the next slide, not all fruit trees need a cross-pollinator, but most of them do, and even the ones that don't actually need a cross-pollinator bear a lot more fruit. So I looked up this quote. It says, a fruit tree that is partially self-fertile will have a small number of fruit when planted alone, but will bear more fruit when planted with another variety. Some varieties of plums are partially self-fertile, so that must have been like what my parents had, but planting 2 or more will ensure that trees consistently bear fruit. So I'm like, my parents deprived me of growing up with plums just because they wanted to get 2 different trees. Like if they would have just bought 2 plum trees, I'm pretty sure I would have like grown up with plums, and like maybe I wouldn't have had those dreams of having a fruit tree later on because I would have had it growing up. So interesting. As I learn more about cross-pollination and like this topic about the tree of we, I really started to realize that we are a lot like that. We as people need to cross-pollinate with one another in order for us to bear fruit, in order for us to bear good fruit, in order for us to bear the most fruit. And so when you think about it, we're in the season of Christmas, right? We've got these beautiful like Christmas trees all around. You want to know what kind of tree or variety of tree a Christmas tree is? Anybody know? Anybody know what kind of tree it is, a Christmas tree? There's lots of varieties, but like the overarching evergreens, pines. Yeah, so evergreens and pines, right? So we see these trees, even if we're planting trees in our own yard, or we see them kind of out there like in an urban landscape, we see like one type of tree planted. But just think a little bit. Even when you think about the beautiful Christmas tree that we chop down and we put in our houses, or we get the artificial kind, when you see pine trees out in nature, do you ever really see them by themselves? No. You usually see them in like a forest, right? A pine forest, a pine tree forest. And the same thing when you go like, Hannah and Nick know that I love going apple picking. They've been with me before. The Curtis Orchard, it's one of my favorite fall activities. But even when you see trees out in the wild, you see them together in groves, in forests, right? And all these different things. So I thought this was very interesting. Even when I looked up, because tis the season, we've got Christmas trees everywhere. And I was like looking up about like, do pine trees need that? And they're like, yes, pine trees. When they grow in forests, they do a lot better. They actually pollinate through wind, like the wind carries their seed from tree to tree. But again, you rarely ever see trees just out in the wild. Again, we plant them, but you rarely see them out in the wild growing in nature just on their own. You usually see a bunch of trees together. And one of the things that I realized is that even like Jesus was a model of this for us. Jesus cross-pollinated with all kinds of people who liked him, people who didn't like him, people who were very different from him. Jesus even did life with a select group of people. He had a posse. Anybody know who Jesus' posse was? His disciples, the apostles, right? He had a group of people that he did life with, and then even like had a very inner circle when he like went to pray in the garden and so even Jesus, I think he really modeled this for us. And so we're going to focus on a scripture, some familiar to some, the fruit of the Spirit. Okay, so we're just going to read this from Galatians. It's probably familiar to many of you, and if not, here it is. Okay, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. The law is not against such things. So we could talk about each one of those different parts or aspects of the fruit of the Spirit and spend a really long time, but in the essence of time, I'm only going to hone in on just a select few of those aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. So the first one that I want to focus in on is love. So that was the first one that was mentioned, love, a way to pollinate with other trees. So we're like trees. We kind of need to cross-pollinate with each other in order for us to bear the fruit of the Spirit, in order for us to grow in all aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. And so how important do we think this aspect, love, was to God? There are lots of verses in the Bible that talk about love. There's a whole lot. But I did pick out just one passage in particular on the next slide that I'll go over, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So in this, there's somebody who would come up, Jesus, this is when Jesus was on earth, and there was somebody who would come up and ask him a question. So one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked him, of all of the commandments, all of them, which is the most important? The most important one, answered Jesus, is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this: love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So the first one was pretty obvious, right? Love me. God's okay, you gotta love, yes, you should love God first. But he could have put so many different things as the second. He could have been serve, go to church, help people, all kinds of things. But love was so important, and loving others was so important that he put it as the second. Right under loving God himself is loving people, loving your neighbor as yourself. That's how important it was to God. And love can be a little bit tricky, right? We have these different ideas of what it looks like and how it can be. But how do we, when we talk about cross-pollination, right? How do we love other people by ourselves? If we're just by ourselves, if we're just planted in that forest all alone, right? So how do we love people by ourselves? You can't really love people just by yourself, right? We need to cross-pollinate with each other, just like the trees do out in nature, in order for us to grow this aspect of the fruit of the Spirit. So you can do this in a lot of practical ways. It doesn't always have to be this big, grandiose thing. Maybe it might just be that you are thinking about someone. You feel like maybe God's bringing somebody to your mind a lot. Maybe you're praying for them. Maybe you just reach out to them via text. Maybe you just call them, or you just send them a text and say, hey, just wanted you to know I was thinking about you. I hope you're doing well. You can love somebody just by smiling at them or giving them a compliment. Those kinds of things actually really make people's day, right? So there's lots of practical ways. And sometimes, I call myself an ambivert, because I'm very extroverted around people who I'm very comfortable with, and then people I'm not so comfortable with, I kind of really don't talk that much. So I kind of in between, I don't know. But I think about some people who are not as extroverted as me, who are more introverts. This can be a little bit scary. You're but I don't really want to be around people that much. I'm much more comfortable on my own. But you know what? Even if you're an introvert, you're probably a really good listener. And I was just hearing that from somebody today. That's what a lot of people need, is just to be listened to sometimes, right? And again, you can text somebody and just say, hey, I was thinking about you. I hope you're okay, right? Pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone a little bit to love people in different ways. I think it really helps us grow this aspect of the fruit of the Spirit. And another thing, though, is that love can get messy. It is definitely not always easy. And one of the things that I have realized in my own life, love doesn't always look the way that I expected it to look, right? We see love in movies, romance, all these different things. Sometimes love is, sometimes a lot, love is me playing a game with my daughter that I really don't want to play. That happens quite a lot. But I know she will feel well loved when I am like play this random game with her that I just don't feel like it, right? But also, sometimes love might even require loving somebody from a distance. Now, this is not an out or an excuse for you to be like, yes, I really don't want to be around that person. Please, yes, that's my green light to love them from a distance. Hallelujah, right? So that's, when I think about like some of the ways that love can be messy, I think it's really important for us to really pray to God and ask him. So like Nick had talked before about being connected to the vine, right? The tree of life. And so it's really important for us to be connected to the vine to say, how do we love these people? I'm struggling here. How do I love this particular person that I'm having a hard time? In my first message that I gave, I shared some of my own personal story. And just even me realizing that like me loving somebody and a relationship that was very unhealthy meant loving them from a distance. Took a lot of prayer, and tears and all of those things. But again, it's not just a green light to like distance yourself from everybody, but I think it's just really important for us to be asking God. Some of the ways we love people are a lot more obvious, like I shared, but sometimes it's messy and it's hard, and it really requires us to plug in and connect to the source, right? To Jesus, and to really ask, how do I love this person? Sometimes it is, sometimes it really is those people who you don't want to be around that God might be saying, no, I do need you to spend a little bit more time with them and love them in this way, right? And this goes for me too. So this also brings me into the next one. Goodness, that's the other aspect that I wanted to focus on. Goodness, I have trees up close, trees far away. So I do want to ask you guys first, when you think about goodness, Nick talked about the good life at one point, when you think about just that word goodness, like what images does your mind conjure up? What do you think about when you hear that word, goodness? Vacations, okay. You think of what? Niceness. Yes. You know what? That's really what that's what I think of too. It's just kind of like niceness, goodness, like, you're a good person, right? That's kind of what I think of when I think of goodness. And I think sometimes it's really hard. I know, even for myself, I know sometimes for me, it's hard for me to see the goodness in other people, right? And so another little quick story that I want you to imagine, see if you can put yourself here. So imagine that there's like this little boy in a neighborhood, right? He plays outside all of the time, and there's this mean old lady who lives next door, and he just tries to avoid her at all costs. Like, he's tried to say hi to her before, and she just like glares at him, and his friends don't want to come over to his house anymore because this lady just seems like so mean and scary, and he really doesn't want to have anything to do with her, right? He's just seen her just like be mean. People are trying to be nice to her, and she's just like not having any of it, and he's honestly a little bit scared of her. So one day he and his mom are coming home, and his mom notices that this lady, the mean old lady, is next door, and she's like struggling to bring her groceries in the house. And so mom says, I need you to go over there. You need to go help her with those groceries in the house. He's like, no, this is my worst nightmare. She's so mean. I don't want to do this. She's like, no, you need to go. So begrudgingly, he goes over there, kind of asks and mumbles, do you want me to help you bring the groceries in? She doesn't really say anything, but he can tell that she's struggling, and she doesn't say no. So he picks up the groceries, she opens the door, he brings them into her house, asks where she wants him to put them. She motions to the kitchen table, so he sets the groceries down, and he can't kind of help but notice some things around her house, and he starts noticing all these pictures on the wall. And he notices what appear to be like pictures of her family, her kids, maybe like a husband. And one interesting thing he notices that she actually looks really happy in those pictures, that she's smiling. He has never, ever seen this lady crack a smile. She just always looks angry. And he's kind of taken aback by this. And he can't help but ask her, are those your family members in the picture? She has like a little faint smile and says, yeah, those are my children. They're adults now. They live out of state. I don't get to see them very often, but yes, that's my family. And yes, that's my husband. He's the love of my life. He died about 5 years ago. But yep, that's my family. All of a sudden, with just that little bit of information, he sees this mean lady very differently. Instead of just thinking that she is like a terrible person who's mean, he starts to shift and think, maybe she's just really lonely. Like her family's gone, her husband's gone, she doesn't get to see her children very often, they've moved away. Maybe she's just really lonely. And I bring that story up because I think for us, it's really hard at times. We're in kind of like this culture of like, we have so many different camps, right? So let's say I'm like in a pine tree forest and I'm this like beautiful pine tree and I'm like, pine trees, we're the best. And Hannah's in an orange grove and Matt's in an apple orchard. And we're all just like kind of pitted against each other. But honestly, that's what we do. Like, you know, whether it's politically, religiously, whatever else, it's easy for us to like be far away and not see the goodness in each other and really see the opposite of that in each other, even if we have very different views. But I think when we get up close to people intentionally, it can be easier for us to see the goodness in them. Even when we thought that there is no way that there is goodness in this person, right? I think when we're intentional about cross-pollinating, getting a little bit closer to people, it's easier for us to see the goodness in each other. So when I say trees up close, trees far away, right? When we, say if I go, Hannah's like an orange tree, and maybe I don't even know that she's got all these like fresh oranges if I'm really far away. But if I'm up close, I can appreciate the goodness. I'm like, wow, look at these oranges. Look at all these things. I didn't even know that this was here. I just thought I was better because I could be dressed up as a Christmas tree. People can put lights on me, right? All these things. But once I was intentional about getting up close and seeing the good fruit, seeing the things in other people, seeing the goodness in others, but it does take intentionality. And I think it's also a way to draw out the goodness in us too. Of course, you have to be careful, right? Life is messy. Like I said, we do have to really be connected to God and pray about these things. And there's going to be some hiccups because we're human. It's the world we live in. We're all going to make mistakes. But again, it's really easy for us to write people off and to not want to cross-pollinate with others who seem very different than us. But that also dehumanizes people. And I think when we get up closer to people intentionally, it's easier, again, for us to see the goodness in others. So a couple of scriptures, a couple of scriptures that I had to kind of drive this point home. So in Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So God, a good God, created each and every one of us. So if a good God created us, we all have some goodness inside of us. Again, we may have to be a little bit more intentional about cross-pollinating, getting up close, seeing the goodness in others. And then the other one, Genesis 1:31. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So the reason I picked this scripture in particular, so in this part of Genesis, God is like creating all the things. He creates this on one day, he says it was good. He creates this on one day, he says it was good. By the time he gets to creating man and woman, that's the only time where God said it was very good, right? God said it was very good on that day when he created us in his own image. So there is goodness inside each of us. Sometimes we might have to hunt a little bit for it. And again, sometimes we do definitely have to be discerning and prayerful and asking God how we love people, how we see the goodness in them. But this does require patience, which brings me to my next point. Cross-pollination in one season, fruit in another, and what's really going on inside that pine forest. So patience is one of those topics that's kind of hard to talk about. I am not always the most patient person, believe it or not. I definitely not always the most patient person, and I realize that about myself. I'm working on it. But what we just talked about, and the messiness of love, the messiness of seeing the goodness in others does require a lot of patience. Grows that aspect of the fruit of the Spirit for us. When we are intentional about cross-pollinating with others, our patience is going to grow because it is not always easy. So, quick question. Has anyone ever either been in a pine forest or hiked through a pine forest? Anybody? Show of hands. Anybody ever hiked around a pine forest before, Evergreen forest? Okay. Han, I'm putting you on the spot. When you were hiking through a pine forest, what did you see when you were on the inside of that forest? Did you only see pine trees? Or did you see anything else? Any other kind of plants or wildlife or anything? It's okay if you don't know. Ah, yes. I don't remember. That's okay. So, when I think about, and I kind of talked about this before, about it's easy for us to kind of see one type of tree or one type of person and want to camp out with the ones who are just like us. But even when you look at a forest, a pine forest, and it looks like it's all pine trees. I had that picture up before. But when you go inside of a forest, maybe you'll see primarily pine trees, but you're going to see some other plants there too. You might even see a few other kinds of trees in there as well. So the next quote I thought was pretty interesting. Forests are naturally diverse. It's going to get real academic. I promise I'll explain it. But forests are naturally diverse. And this diversity of plant species brings an array of benefits: pests and disease resistance, resilience to climate change, and increased wildlife habitat. Another disadvantage of monocultures, and monocultures is when people plant one type of thing, just one type of thing, is the risk of planting failure, where a sapling fails to thrive, and early mortality. So that's from the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. So I thought that was really interesting. Basically what this quote is saying, that forests, when they just happen naturally, they're diverse. They have lots of different plants and all these things in there and different kinds of trees, and that's really beneficial to them. It helps them be more resilient. It helps them ward off different types of pests and disease. But and sometimes I think this is something that people do, when we plant a whole bunch of different trees together, they're actually a lot less resilient, and they're at risk of not surviving, essentially. And so this is again the case with us. It definitely works our patience though. So when which I am definitely more inclined to hang out with people who are like me, who share my same values and thoughts and all that, and not as inclined to hang out with people who challenge me a little bit more, right? Who are a little harder, who maybe think a lot differently than me, who maybe just maybe annoy me a little bit or whatever. I'm not as inclined to hang out with those type of people. But when you think about it, the people who challenge us the most, the people who work our patience the most, don't you see yourself growing the most? I can think back, and yes, it's hard and it's painful, but I can definitely say some of the most challenging people have definitely increased my patience and have also caused me to grow the most. Again, all takes lots of discernment and all that, but that's just another thing to think about. So the scripture that I have that goes along with that one is, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. And if you really think about, has anybody ever sharpened knives before? Anybody ever sharpened knives before? Okay. The act of sharpening something is not like, woo, this would feel great if this was happening to me, right? Like, it's not. It is a, like, kind of, you think about it, like metal scraping against something metal, ouch. Like, if I was a knife, I'd be like, why are you doing this to me? So when you think about what that actual act is, iron sharpening another, that is kind of a painful process. And it's not necessarily an easy process. And I think it's, again, those people who maybe challenge our views a little bit, challenge our thinking, maybe that takes some work, and that really increases our patience, but it does also help us grow. So the last point that I want to land on, because it is Christmas, is joy. Okay, we're going to end on a high note. Is joy. So we all can use opportunities to increase our joy and to increase this aspect of the fruit of the Spirit. And so when we think about the reason that we celebrate Christmas, right, for the birth of the Messiah who's come, who they've waited on for a long time, that is a reason to celebrate. So I'm going to read a couple of scriptures, okay? So therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. So in this particular scripture, as I was doing a little bit more research and everything, this was prophesied. The coming of the Messiah was prophesied like 700, and Nick can correct me if I'm wrong, about 700 years before he actually came. Before he actually came. So I'll read the next one as well, which is also from Isaiah. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and peace, there will be no end. Upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time forward, even forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. So this was a prophecy. This hadn't actually happened yet in Isaiah. Again, about 700 years before. So just like, put yourself there. Imagine that this Messiah, like your country, your family had been going through this very difficult time. And it had been prophesied that a Messiah was coming. And think about just the anticipation again. And this had been passed down. The person who had prophesied this had died long ago. And so this was a prophecy that had been passed down. And the people are just expectantly waiting and anticipating that this Messiah who's going to save them is coming. And think about just how much of a buildup that is, right? How much they're anticipating it. And then they get word that Jesus, their Messiah, has actually been born. He's here. He's actually come to earth. Think about just the immense joy for something that they had been waiting on for years and literally hundreds of years. Think about the immense joy they must have felt when they heard that their Messiah was actually here, that he had actually been born. He'd actually come. It actually happened. He finally came. So as we think about that, just take a quick moment to think about which one of these aspects of the fruit of the Spirit would you like to be more intentional about? We talk about cross-pollinating with others. Do you want to increase your patience, your love, your joy, seeking out the goodness in others? Just take a quick moment to kind of think about that.